In other words, you can have a non-contradictory symbolic system or model. You can have that, but it's not going to be complete. It's going to be extremely limited, extremely partial, and it's not going to be capable of self-reference. It's not going to be able to explain itself. You see, because one of the tricks that science pulls, one of the dualistic tricks, is that science comes up with models, but then those models, they can explain reality, some corner of reality, but they never explain the whole of reality, nor are they capable, notice this, they're not capable of explaining themselves. And this is true of science as a whole. Science as a whole can explain a lot of stuff within reality, but science as a whole cannot explain science. Have you noticed this? This is not an accident. There's a deep fundamental reason for why this must be the case. Because, see, science is something consciousness is doing. Science is something the mind is doing. So science can explain everything, but science can't explain consciousness, and science can't explain the mind. And you might say, well, Leo, so what? What's the big deal? But actually, there is a big deal, because ultimately what science really cares about, the spirit of science, is about trying to understand all of reality, which includes consciousness and includes minds too. And so there's a deep problem, because right now you can find on YouTube many videos of interviews with famous scientists. And they're commonly asked questions like, what is consciousness? Where did consciousness come from? Is consciousness fundamental? And you see them giving these long-winded, winding answers, which clearly show that they're clueless about what consciousness is. And they're playing games, and they're pretending to give you answers, but they're not really giving you answers. And some of these scientists are even forced into a position where they have to deny consciousness. They have to deny consciousness because you can't explain consciousness through science, because consciousness is prior to science, because science is something consciousness is doing. So this is the self-reference problem. The problem is that they're not conscious enough to realize that this self-reference problem is at the heart of all of science, and logic and mathematics and rationality and skepticism. Because they've limited themselves to that particular paradigm, and they refuse to see anything beyond that. And it's actually not possible to understand accurately what reality is as long as you're working within a finite, closed, carefully curated symbolic system. You can't understand the ultimate questions about reality that way. You can't answer questions like, why is there something rather than nothing? What is consciousness? What is death? What is the purpose of life? What is love? What is God? Is there free will? What is the self? Where did the universe come from? Will it ever end? You can't answer these questions from that little walled garden. And then here's the mistake that many scientists and rationalists make, is they say, well, Leo, you can't answer those questions because those questions don't have answers. They're just bullshit philosophical armchair questions that don't have any answers. No, they have absolute definite answers. They have very satisfying answers. They have answers that are beyond any word games and beyond even the answers of science. But it's just that those answers lie outside of your little walled garden, your paradigm. And so, see, you can either admit that there are answers that exist outside your walled garden, or you can deny it and you can say, no, only answers within my walled garden are true answers. And then if you do that, you're stuck forever in ignorance. And then when you actually do hear the answers, like when you hear me talking about love or God or consciousness, and I give you definitive answers, you get upset. If you're attached to that walled garden of yours, you get upset. Why? Well, you have to. Because the things I'm saying are directly contradicting your little walled garden. They're destroying your walled garden, And you must maintain that walled garden because that's what you're committed to. As a scientist, rationalist, academic, materialist, dualist, realist, skeptic, logician, mathematician, that's what you're in the business of. Please see that. So there's an enormous cost that comes. The cost that comes with maintaining your little walled garden is so high that you don't even understand the cost yet. I haven't even begun to articulate the cost to you. I've only been talking about some of the theoretical costs. There are actually survival level costs. There are emotional costs. There are karmic costs. There is the suffering and pain that you construct for yourself by constructing your little narrow walled gardens. And you don't see those costs because your walled garden is so deeply at the root of the way that you see reality that any errors in your epistemology there will percolate through and distort your entire perception of reality so thoroughly that you won't even be able to have enough self-awareness and self-reflection to see how your own epistemology is constructing your own limits as a human, as a living being, as a conscious agent. It's sort of like you're handcuffing yourself without realizing that you're handcuffing yourself, and then you're throwing away the key. You're never, ever going to be able to find it again. Because not only do you throw away the key, you also brainwash yourself to tell yourself that the key never even existed. And that you've always just been in handcuffs, and that this is the natural condition. And that everybody is like this, and there's no solution. There is a solution, but you have to stop brainwashing yourself with these limited, rigid, narrow, symbolic systems that you've constructed, that you've picked up from your culture.